Bill Connelly, college football insider, expert, and writer, joining us on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline once again. Bill, how's life in a world where EA Sports college football is returning?
It might be like 3 years from now, but it was still just great to have the buzz back to remind ourselves what could be, I guess. So that was good. I appreciate them doing that. We can use all the optimism we can get right now.
Let the debates continue about who deserves to be on the cover. A topic for another day, that's for sure. Hey, we just outlined your numbers and metrics to open up our show today. BYU 127th, essentially dead last in overall returning production. Should BYU football fans be freaking out, Bill?
Well, I mean, if you're expecting another top 10 run, this suggests the odds of that aren't amazing. I mean, you could counter with that and say that, they weren't amazing last year, this time last year either. And look what happened. So you can lean on that. But right now, I mean, yeah, a lot of the most important pieces of that run are gone. And so it does seem like you're kind of starting a new cycle, so to speak, a new build, so to speak.
Okay, so let's talk about the values within that metric. So you put 29% for pass yards, 5% for rush yards, 34% for wide receiver, tight end receiving yards, 33% for O-line snaps. Why 5% for rush yards?
Well, okay, first, I mean, we have to think about how many people are on the field for each of these categories. Now, quarterback passing yards at 29%. Yeah, I mean, quarterback is
sure.
I think we can all agree that they're important. But basically, everybody else, you're looking at about 7 or 8% per receiver, about 6 or 7% per offensive lineman, and then 5% per running back, more or less. And so it's not that it looks bad because we're looking at 5% versus 20 or 30%, but really per person, it's not as bad as it seems at the very least, but it is interesting. The continuity required at the receiver position seems to mean a lot more. And maybe, you can replace running backs a little bit easier than you can, a couple star receivers or something.
Bill, it's hard not to feel like BYU has entered a full-on rebuilding mode, and you called it a partial rebuild, but based on those metrics and losing the likes of Zach Wilson and Dax Milne, of course, we mentioned the running backs coming back, but in the spectrum, is it closer to a rebuild or is it closer to a reload for BYU?
Well, I think the positive spin is, BYU's been pretty good on the lines, and that's where a lot of the production has to be replaced. Zach Wilson is obviously a different story here. He was really special, and we'll see exactly what kind of a replacement level BYU quarterback is capable of, or if the next guy up, whether it's Romney or whoever, if the next guy up can be anywhere near as good. But a lot of the lost production comes on the lines where BYU's been solid through the years. They lose, their top 2 offensive linemen, top 3 defensive linemen, but it's been a while since BYU had a bad defensive line. So that would be some of the positive spin I could offer. Another source of continuity typically another source of, regression or improvement is the secondary, where if you lose a lot of guys, it hurts extra, and losing the top 3 guys in terms of snap counts there, that isn't great. But really, for me, it comes down to the quarterback position. I think everybody else can be replaced at a pretty sufficient level. We just have to see just what the drop-off is once you lose Zach Wilson.
And certainly the offseason is full of projections based on the known, right? So what's the connection, in your opinion, between what you're putting out in terms of returning production and then success on the field? Because the variable in this equation is the new guys. In BYU's case, dudes they signed 2 years ago or 3 that went on missions and are coming back that may or may not play a role. Obviously, freshmen and transfers and whatnot.
Yeah, so this ends up being part of the SP Plus projection. It's a big part of it, obviously, and it's a very good. If you're really high or really low on the returning production list, it's a pretty good. It's not a guarantee, but it's pretty close that you're going to improve or regress. But it's still only part of the equation. The SP Plus also takes into effect recent recruiting, not just last year or the last couple of years, but kind of a blend of the last 3 or 4 years. So how you've recruited there, it's kind of intended to be here's what you lose and here's the caliber of guy you're replacing them with. And then there's also what I call a program health aspect to it, which is basically just kind of a weighted history of recent seasons. Like one good or bad season is one thing, but how have you done over the last last 2, 3, 4 years, that suggests a lot about your program too. So all of those go into effect. So like at Alabama, who never ranks high on returning production because they always lose, 12 draft picks or whatever, they're still projected in the top 2 or 3 the next year. They'll be number 1 this year, probably. So, it all blends together. I think what it basically suggests about BYU this year is, we're not looking at collapse here. We're not looking at, suddenly they're going to be 105th, but they'll probably drop back close to where their general averages are in the 30s or 40s, something like that, when it comes to projecting next year.
How much did the most recent BYU football season, 11 wins, only 1 loss, finished number 11 in the AP poll, how did that season affect the national perception of Kalani Sitake and BYU football moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know what the perception necessarily was before. He was doing fine, all right, fine, some word like that before 2020. And I know, I do just enough of, BYU radio or Salt Lake radio that, people weren't amazingly thrilled with how things were going before 2020. But I think now, the national perception is, hey, he's doing good. He's fine. Maybe they're not, nobody's expecting another top 10 run this next season. Everybody knows that Zach Wilson had a lot to do with that. But I think the national perception of BYU is if it had suffered a little bit of a slide over these last few years, maybe since Bronco Mendenhall left, I would say that the perception has at least rebounded back to where it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. It's up to BYU, obviously, to do more now. If you can make another top 10 or 15 run in the next couple of years, then I think the perceptions shift dramatically once the same coach has done it twice. I think the perceptions are that, it's just an assumption at that point that it's a good program.
And if BYU played, I don't know, 3, 4 Power Fives, I might be like, okay, there's a chance BYU gets to kind of that 10 mark and makes a splash, because no one really cares about a single-digit win team in the national perception. Right. But BYU's playing 7 Power Fives, back to the very aggressive schedules. Albeit not a ton of them world beaters. USC at the end looks like the only game where it's like, okay, that's going to be really, really hard. What's your perception of BYU's season, given that they are playing a more challenging schedule than the non-Power 5 schedule it played in 2020?
Well, I think it's one thing that's interesting is Pac-12 could be really solid this year. So it's not necessarily a great year to load up on Pac-12 opponents. One of the big takeaways from that returning production piece that we put up this week is just that, maybe it was because of the short season or whatever, or what have you, but most of the Pac-12 is back this coming season. Like I think the average was something like 80% returning production for the Pac-12. Everybody else is in the 60s or low 70s. So you're going to see a situation where, Utah's a borderline top 25 team at worst. Arizona State's a borderline top 25 team at worst. Obviously, USC, it's kind of hard to figure out if they're a contender or just kind of a top 15 team, but they're still going to be really solid. Washington State could improve a lot because they returned just about all of last year's production. So, it is a tricky schedule. I'm looking at the schedule right now, and BYU could be a touchdown or so underdog against Utah and Arizona State, a 2-touchdown underdog against USC, kind of toss-up games against Baylor and Washington State and Virginia. So, if the quarterback is not replacement level, if the quarterback is good, lots of wins on the table there, but those projections could go pretty far one way or the other based on the quarterback position.
Incredibly high numbers for the Pac-12, and not surprisingly, 8 of the top 15 teams in your list of returning production are from the Pac-12. There are some new coaches that BYU is going to face, and I always kind of give an advantage to the team that brings back an incumbent, a guy that's been there for a long time. But taking all of those things into consideration, Bill, how many games do you expect BYU to win next season out of the 12 regular season games scheduled?
This is very unsatisfying, I realize, but I do figure, something in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 is most likely.
That's where we're at too.
Yeah, you can easily see how maybe something better could come about. It's not like the Utah and Arizona State games are out of reach by any means. And USC, every time we start to realize like we're talking highly about USC, we realize also, it's been a while since we've been right about that. So, none of these games are out of reach by any, stretch of the imagination, but it is a hard schedule. There's no question about that. So, if this is a top 30 team, then I would say 8-9 wins is on the table. But if it is merely a top 40 or so team, as I think they're going to end up projected next week, then you're probably looking at something in the 7 neighborhood.
Okay, so next week you're coming out with some more projections. Is that what you're saying?
The S&P Plus?
The SP Plus 2021 official mega projection, whatever.
Yeah!
I think that'll be out Monday or Tuesday.
You heard it here first.
Listen, the moment that comes out, we're like, hey, Bill, put out his SP Plus. Let's devour it and see what BYU won't be. No, Zach Wilson, you mentioned it. Special season, all-time season.
Yep.
BYU. There have been a lot of great quarterbacks at BYU. That was as good as almost any season BYU's had, minus maybe Ty Detmer's 90 and Jim McMahon's 80 or something. But what's your perception of the kind of season he had, and your thoughts on the NFL draft with him?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. You always have those guys. We just assumed it was Trevor Lawrence versus Justin Fields. For the last 12 months, we've assumed that was the 2021 draft. And so a guy like Zach Wilson, who had that amazing game at the end of his freshman year, he was hurt his sophomore year. His numbers weren't amazing. Kind of knew he'd be around. Didn't know he'd be so good that he'd declare early. Didn't know he'd be so good that he'd declare early and potentially be a top 5 pick. So it was definitely. It was an incredible season, and it's hard to say it was any of the hype is unjustified. You see the arm, you see the 70 whatever % completion rate. He kind of backs it up. It isn't a case where we're just basing it solely on arm strength or something. He has he was a starter for the better part of 2.5 years. It's kind of a complete resume, and it's funny too because there were times when I had to remind myself that he was really good. I found myself tapping the brakes a lot in the fall, reminding everybody that Tyler Algier is also really, really good because I felt like he was getting overshadowed. Having that ridiculously strong run game to lean on helped Zach Wilson immensely. But, being that Algier is not in the draft and Wilson is, it's time for me to speak more highly of Wilson again, I guess.
Bill, we appreciate the time. Looking forward to your SP Plus projections, the mega projection or whatever you're going to call
That's
it. Right. When and how do our listeners and viewers find that when it comes out along with the rest of your material?
I tweet everything. That's probably still the best way to put everything together. Like obviously, the SP Plus projections will be on the front page of the college football site of the ESPN and all that. But ESPN_Bill C. Everything ends up promoted there a couple of times at least. So that's probably the best place.
Bill, thanks for the time, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Yep.
Bill Connelly of ESPN on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, you know why, we show how.
I like his